Welcome back, everyone. This is our preview episode for the 2024 UTMB. I'm joined by friends, colleagues, Brett Hornig and Leah Yingling. Super stoked for what's to come from this. Leah, I was looking back at our episode library. We missed you last year. You were too busy running a top 10 performance at UTMB, and I think the fastest women's race ever, so we'll excuse it. But this is our first time doing a UTMB preview together since 2022. Feels like a lot's changed, a whole new era. Would you agree? Like, what are you particularly excited about this time around?
UTMB is just so fun to predict and just so fun to be terribly wrong about what your predictions were. I think it's a race where so much happens. There's actually a lot of carnage, a lot of DNFs, a lot of people kind of falling back in the field, and it's impossible to predict who's going to be in the top 10. So I'm excited to hear what we arrive at in this conversation today, because I think this is one where we end up going off the cuff and all of our initial predictions just completely go out the window. But it's a special race. I'm going to be wearing the hat of crew chief this year. My husband Mike is running. It'll be his first time attempting the full loop, and really excited to be on the other side of things and taking some good pictures of him.
Brett, when we hopped in the recording room, I think we both simultaneously said the list of runners lined up for this race that could do serious damage inside the top 10 is massive. It's 5-10 times the size of our Western States research. Did you have fun in this process? Was it overwhelming? Talk about that.
I have mucho carpal tunnel syndrome from all the typing, all the notes. I was trying to figure out where the depth is deep originated, and was it a UTMB preview episode?
I think it was here.
Maybe 2 years ago.
It's 2 years old.
And it's gotten deeper. The earth is about to split with how deep the depth is getting.
There's definitely been some subduction. Some tectonic plates have shifted in our ultra running world since that phrase was coined. By the way, there's a t-shirt that is out in the world. Courtney Olson apparently made a Depth is Deep t-shirt. Eric LaPuma was sporting it. So Brett, your dream of an apparel line has come true.
Yeah. How am I not wearing that shirt right now? Courtney, I need a Depth is Deep shirt, please.
I think we should start with course overview, cruxy sections. Weather is looking decent. I mean, this is way too early. We're recording this 10 days pre-race. It's from my vantage point right now, it's looking fairly decent, not dramatic. But yeah, I think where we start is with the course. Leah, you probably know the course best out of all of us. I've done CCC and I've done parts of the front section to Saint Gervais on a hiking trip, but haven't seen all of it in one push. What parts stand out to you when people are consuming the race a few Saturdays from now? Where should they be paying attention in terms of key places?
So, gosh, nothing looks better than the 3D map on Strava of the UTMB completed loop. It's one of my favorite pictures in the world. Is just circumnavigating Mont Blanc and seeing what that visual looks like at the end. But yeah, UTMB, if you haven't spent any time on course or out on the TMB, it is roughly 108 miles, give or take 2 miles. For us here in the States, I'm not going to do the kilometer conversion, but there's a lot of kilometers. And in terms of elevation gain, last year per my Strava file, I got somewhere around 32,000 feet of climbing. So it's hefty. And I will say a lot of that comes in the, it's not exactly front loaded with vert. You have a lot of climbing kind of starting after around mile 20. So a really runnable first 20 miles, which I think can get runners into trouble often, especially when they're riding the energy of the streets of Chamonix. And one of my things and talking points that I have in my notes is the one segment from Chamonix to Les Houches, which is one of the first segments on the course, and just the blistering pace that some runners have split that section in. And it's completely understandable why. The energy at the start line in Chamonix, the energy that carries you through that first 10K to Les Houches is just completely wild. And it's something unlike anything you've ever experienced. So even if you're a runner like myself, who says and vows that they're going to go out easy, it's nearly impossible to do that at UTMB. So I think that's one thing you really have to balance as a runner is kind of mellowing out the hype and truly running your own race and recognizing that you're going to be running nearly every single step of that first 20 miles before really settling in and doing climb after climb after climb.
Any course observations from you, Brett, just having, followed the live stream, spoken with athletes over the years?
Yeah, one of the things that's always become more apparent, and I don't know, almost more of a surprise that you don't really get to see by looking at the course. The course profile looks like you're like up, down pretty much the whole time. But there's a lot of like long, weird runnable sections as you go in and out of each town that has gotten more visible on each of the live streams. But it just goes to show how much steeper than the climbing is once you leave town, because there you see sections where they're like, coming in for like 2 miles on pavement, not that steep downhill. Same with the exit, but then then you have all these transition miles in and out of the aid stations that are pretty runnable, and then you still have over 30,000 feet of climbing, and you have a somewhat more mellow first 20 miles. There's still a lot that we don't see in the live stream where people get absolutely chewed up, and then they come into the next aid station looking like absolute trash. And, every year as the coverage expands, we get to get a little bit more in-depth picture of some of those in-between sections. But, it's just become more apparent how it's not just fully hike up, run down.
Yeah, Leah, like you mentioned early on in the race, there is that lure before Les Houches to maybe overdo it. But I agree. I mean, I think it might be underappreciated how much you need to have running legs for this race, despite that profile of over 30,000 feet of climbing. We had Tom Evans on the show a few days ago before this race talking about UTMB. And one of the things he said that stuck with me was, if you train like everyone else for this race, you're going to get results like everyone else. And he mentioned that because he said, I started this season opening up with training for the cross country world championships. And I feel like that gave me the legs portion that I need to compensate on certain sections and maybe even like make moves on folks like Walmsley. So I would just throw that out there too, that like they're like, in our friend Jimmy Elam, and this quote has always cracked me up. He says, you could drive a golf cart on more than 50% of this course, despite how mountainous it is. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So I would just caution that to the audience, like folks are going to have to run. And I think Western States legs help here.
Yeah, that is like a lot of people talk about Western States and UTMB doing that double, is it beneficial? Is it not? Is it doing like, is it harming your UTMB performance? And I do think there's an element that actually does help it with just how runnable the sections of UTMB truly are. Like for example, just up on Grand Col Ferret, you've got a long descent down to La Folie. And then even beyond the La Folie aid station, you just keep descending for what seems like forever. And I think that was even just like a misconception in my mind. I was like, oh yeah, I will descend down to La Folie, then we'll start climbing up to Champay-Lac. And no, like that's not the case. You actually you keep descending. And I think being able to maintain your quads for as long as possible is so important in this race. Being able to maintain your quads, being able to run. I actually think that's a bit more important than maintaining your climbing legs later on in the race, because I think you can kind of like keep up a good bit and lose not a ton of time on the climbs, but you can lose major time if you're not descending well. And I think we saw like a lot of moves made, for example, in the men's top 10 last year with people who could just move downhill extremely well towards the end. Like Tyler Green moved up considerably in the top 10 throughout the last couple sections, just because his quads were so resilient. So I think there's this element, like Tom mentioned, where you want to be able to run, but you also want to be pounding your quads a good bit during training to make sure you can maintain those paces on the downhills late in the race.
Just to go off that, we've talked about hard rock in that sense, where it's like the climbing's so high up and a lot of it's so steep that it gets kind of neutralized because everyone's very similar in terms of aerobic fitness, but it's like who can keep descending over and over. And then the conversation was like, well, UTMB, you can climb a little bit harder because, the altitude's not as high. Are we getting to that point where even at a course like UTMB, the climbing's getting more neutralized now, and it's now turning into like, you need to mostly train to win this race on descents, and a byproduct of, getting good at descending is you usually have to like go up a hill in order to run down it. Are we seeing that like almost a shift in a way of the way you could compete at this race?
I'd say yes and no. I think the one thing about UTMB, and usually with these race prediction episodes, we put people in boxes and kind of categorize them per the style of athlete that they are. I think with UTMB, you need to be pretty good at just about everything. And I think that's who we will see do the best in this race, is not a certain specialist in one capacity, but somebody that does everything well and has trained everything well. So I think, yeah, there's bits and pieces there. I also will disagree a little bit with the fact that the UTMB course is not technical. I think there's definitely sections that are technical. And I think the technicality that sticks out to me largely is just a lot of routes at times. And these will be in sections at a time, like going down in Valorscene, the newer rerouted section after Valorscene that you climb and descend and then climb again before going up to La Flégère. So I think you have to even be a good runner on routes, which a lot of people don't really train specifically on in training. So being agile enough in the later stages of the race to fare well on that stuff and not get frustrated.
To that point, Leah, for folks that haven't been on the UTMB course, you couldn't place the technicality of this race in a worse position than the last 6 miles, around La Flégère, around Valorscene. Doing that last 6 mile descent into town, especially if it's in the dark. I guess during UTMB for the top contenders, it'll be mostly in the daylight. But it's not like you have this carpet to the finish rewarding you for making the full lap. There's still some proprioception involved. There's still some mental clarity needed. It can be a little treacherous.
Yeah, and I would definitely recommend having intact feet for that section, feet and quads, because I think if one of those are impaired on that final section or that final stretch by any means, you're really limited in what you can do heading to the finish, because it's a pretty steep, tough downhill on some tired legs.
Brett, maybe I'll throw this question to you first. I'm sure if we did a head count, 2024 would be another record year where the number of pro and amateur athletes heading over a month or two ahead of time to train on the course is at an all-time high. I guess what I'm wondering as it relates to training specificity, if you've already kind of been there and done that, if you're a veteran of UTMB, you did it in whatever, 21, 22, you spent a summer out there. Do you feel like it's still necessary? Are the margins so tight that, in this day of age, you have to continue to be out there ahead of time? Or could someone spend a season, in the Eastern Sierra after 5 years of time in Chamonix and be totally ready to do battle for this race?
I think it might depend on the person. And Tom Evans brought this up in his pre-race interview with you. And I thought that was super fascinating of Tom was yeah, I made sure I have all the tools to get in the training by the numbers, to make sure that I'm fully prepared for the race. And I personally would prefer to stay at home, not have to worry about the logistics of training, not from home. And then it gets me really excited to go explore, see the trails for the first time in a while. And, I think there's definitely some people who are going to benefit hugely from just the excitement of I haven't been out here, There's other people who are going to be no, I would love to make sure that I know every single rock and every single route out on course. I think I personally would tend to fall into that second category where the more time I could just spend out on course, the better. Maybe with years of experience and just being out there, you see less and less that you're okay, no, I know. I know that if I race, Western states again, I wouldn't need to go on the course for the sake of training. It would just be more for the sake of I like running out there. But I know that I can get in what I need to in other places.
Where do you come down on this, Leah?
Yeah, I think there's a reason we're not in Chamonix right now and we're out on the outskirts in neighboring areas in Switzerland. I think there's been just such an influx of people into the Chamonix region in recent years, and like doing multiple loops on the course before the race gets going. And I think that speaks to like the increased professionalism of the sport and the increased specificity. But I think I'm speaking specifically from like a American perspective, like just getting used to the Alps trails in general is useful. And I think the Alps trails are similar regardless of where you are in the Alps. So right now, Mike and I have been spending some time out in like the Eiger area, and then out we're in Zermatt right now. And I think just getting the feel for like the long ascents, the long descents, getting familiar with those, getting that specificity on your legs, I think, frankly, is good enough. I think there's some places in the States that you can get similar training and you might just be more comfortable training at home in your environment and preferring that more. And I think there's something to be said about just the energy suck that can be all the hype and all the people for an entire month before your key race, especially for some of the teams that all stay together in the month leading up to the race too. I think that's increased for infection and viruses and stuff like that spreading as well, but it's also increased risk of just like mentally being drained by the time race day rolls around. So definitely pros and cons to both. But yeah, I think this year, after spending a lot of time on course last year, we're seeing some pros of just being like outside the madness for a little bit.
I think we should move on to the women's field. Brett, your shirt says it here for the women's race. And maybe we start with top storylines, and I can go first. For me, and there's many, but one is the debut, finally, of Ruth Croft at UTMB. And I hate to say debut sometimes because she's won OCC, she's won CCC. She trained to line up for this race last year, so she was like a week removed from being on the start line. She did a full, at least month, I think, around Chamonix on the course, etc. But she's here. When she's on, she's on. I mean, I almost felt like last year with a slightly compromised Courtney, 2 races into her triple, it could have been her race to win. Brett, how do you feel about Ruth's entry in this race this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited for it. I mean, there's got to be some positives that come for training for this, like positives that come with training for this race twice and then finally getting to run it. I mentioned that same thing with like Tim Tollefson training for Western States this year in hopes that he would get pulled off the wait list, but then didn't. It's like, cool, dude, you did out in this massive 100-mile training block, didn't trash yourself with the race. Like, who in their right mind's ever going to do that, knowing that they're not going to do that race? So yeah, I'm curious if Ruth's now like somehow like a veteran without actually having started UTMB, at least from a training standpoint. Listening to some of her interviews about the mental side of things, she's one of the most fascinating people in the sport in that regard. Yeah. And, this is just one of those races where it's like the longer it gets, really long night sections, potentially really crappy weather. It's like, who can just like keep their shit together the longest and not get into those like, pity party type stages. And, Ruth's definitely one of those people who mentally is proven to like be one of the toughest out there. And then also physically one of the gifted. And when you put those, most gifted, when you put those two together, you have someone who has like a very, very high ceiling on a course like this.
Well, and I think too, like what Leah, you were saying about the many ways you can sort of win this race now. Brett, I think you kind of started that conversation. To me, she is one of the most complete runners on either the men's side or the women's side. And yeah, we had her on the podcast last year before the race, and I'm so bummed that she couldn't line up. But the depths that she has gone to, the depth is deep in terms of like leaving no stone unturned for her to be like in that mental ed space to win or get the best. Like I think she was training to be a naturopath at the time and had done all of these like fairly exotic, like just tests and stuff on her mind and body. I'd have to go back and re-listen, but it was impressive. Well, Leah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Ruth is just one of those true professionals in the sport. She takes it really seriously. And you see that like in the way that she impeccably executes every race that she lines up for. Like she's never lining up on a start line and kind of like half-assing it or not taking it seriously. Like she's always training with everything in mind when she does that, which I love to see. And she's just such a competitor and isn't afraid to like race people and race from the front either. So I like to see those elements. Last year, after she couldn't line up at UTMB, she ended up channeling all that energy into a really, really solid race at Ultra Trail Cape Town, which is not an easy course whatsoever. And she just completely slaughtered it and did so well. And then back that up with a course record at Transvolcania then in the spring. So she can kind of do it all. And like you mentioned, wins it. I think she's won OCC twice. She's won CCC. Not many women in the field. I think Blandine's the only other one that's won both of those races. So I think, it speaks to just her experience on these trails too. And she's run 100 miles at Western States 2 times. Something I do think is interesting was her win at Western States 2 years ago. I think she ran 17:21, which would have put her 8th place in this year's field. So it just speaks to how much the sport has progressed, especially at Western States in the last 2 years. I would love to see like her in the mix there, but I think that's what's cool about Ruth as an athlete is she's so versatile and she excels on, a course like Western States, but even more so on a course like UTMB. So excited to see her put together for her longest time on feet yet.
Another storyline in this year's race that is intriguing to me, at least psychologically for female frontrunners, the top 2 women from last year, Courtney Dauwalter, Katarina Hartmuth, are not returning. Sending it back to you actually first, Leah, do you, like, if you're in this field, does that have any psychological impact on how you approach this race? Does it feel like there's more opportunity? Is title defense a big thing? Because like on the men's side, there's that, big target, we assume, on Jim Walmsley's back. How would you interpret this as a competitor?
Yeah, I think it was really exciting to see Katie enter the game a couple weeks ago when she announced that she was going to be doing UTMB. I think that added a really interesting dimension. I was almost hoping that Courtney would come into and say that she was racing as well. And I was like, oh my God, this is just going to be the best UTMB that we've ever spectated. But I think adding Katie into the mix made it super exciting. I think before that, it might have been like a little bit easier to a little bit more interesting to predict what was going to happen. But I think really anything can happen now. I think we're going to see very similar running from a lot of the women that were in the top 10 last year. So we do have 6 of last year's top 10 returning. And that includes, I think the only ones that aren't going to be there, Elsa McDonald, Katarina, Courtney, and myself. So that's, 6 people that I think what we're seeing with women is just like consistency year after year. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the same, like those same 6 returners be in contention for top 10 spots again. And then we have people like Marianne Hogan, who was on the podium 2 years ago, coming back for this round and hopefully having a really strong go again after she had a really solid result, but actually suffered an injury mid-race and still was able to hang on the way she did.
I've got a fun storyline.
Let's hear it.
The women's Western States podium plus 4th place Emily Hawgood are all racing UTMB, competing for the double. Like, that's nuts. And also awesome. Like, for some reason, I feel like if I had looked at the men's top 4 and they were like, we're all running UTMB, I'd be a little bit like more hesitant to be like, oh yeah, they're all going to crush it. But then like this women's top 4, I'm like, dude, are they just going to run it back and go like 1 through 4 at UTMB also? Because like that's not out. Like that's not that unlikely. Like, you're very good. They all ran very fast, and they all seem to bounce back pretty well after Western States, and they all have had good results at UTMB at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Esther. Well, Katie. Who got second? Where's the name?
Fuzhou.
Shang Fuzhou, yeah.
Shang Fuzhou, Esther, and then Emily Hawgood. They have all run good UTMBs. They've now all run good Western States.
And to add to that, after the fastest Western States ever, what an experiment to see if they can recreate that on a high level, 8-9 weeks later. Like, is there a toll? Are they paying a toll from such a performance breakthrough in the sport? Did they swipe a credit card to make that happen? Or like, is this just the new reality? I'm excited to see the results, you know.
Leah, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you think beats up the body more? A fast Western States on a cool year or slow Western States on a really hot year?
Slow Western States on a hot year for sure. Yeah, like I think the way we're seeing nutrition transform, shoes transform, I think people will likely be recovering better. I think the argument I've made in past years is I do wonder how people who are shooting for the podium and get on the podium at Western States, how they then perform at UTMB, because oftentimes like a podium performance, like really guts you, gets a lot out of you. I think what we saw this year was like people truly racing and pushing each other to extremes. So I'm curious to see how much residual effects from those performances we'll see. I do think it seems a bit easier to get top 10 again at UTMB if you're not one of those like podium contenders at the front at Western States. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I think if I were somebody like Ruth Croft, Blandine, Marianne Hogan, I'd be kind of happy that I had 4 people who just ran 100 miles competing for those front spots. I think that's a little bit vulnerable, and we'll see how they all have turned around. I think something else that's interesting about that is Katie, Fouchao, and Esther are all coached by Jason Koop, in addition to Lucy Bartholomew, who was also in the top 10 last year at UTMB. So we got a lot of Jason Koop athletes going to be competing out there again as well. So curious to see like how the differences in training and recovery kind of line up on race day.
To follow up on that, it reminds me of one of my bold predictions for this year. And I agree that until this year, it was noticeably easier to top 10 at UTMB than it was at Western. I think that changes this year. I think it's equalized. I think 2024 is the first year where on the women's side, like they're both on equal standing. And I think we're just going to see massive performance breakthroughs at this year's race. Maybe we can get into those later. That kind of play that out. That's one of my predictions.
I think we still see more blowups at UTMB than Western States. And I think that's because you are going to have to roll the dice more to be in the top 10. Because while there might be less people blowing up or less people going for it at the front, if you have 40 women trying to go for top 10, 30 aren't going to blow up. And it's like, how many people are you really going to pick off in the second half of the race? I don't know. I predict a little more dice rolling, but I think we also see more like 7s and 11s than before as well.
Leah, I feel like we're just throwing questions at you. I have one. Obviously, you did the double well last year, 9th at Western, 8th at UTMB. When you were at the start line for UTMB last year, if you could put a rough percentage on where you were at 0 to 100 in terms of freshness, where do you feel like you were at on race day? Like, was it like an 80% Leah, 90? Like, where were you at?
Can we first talk about where they physically placed me on that start line? Because that was right next to Jim Walmsley. So physically, I was in a terrible location, but mentally and emotionally, no, I think with every longer race I line up for, I feel ready to go. I feel like you just have to execute and you're working with what you got. I felt pretty rested on that day and ready to roll and like actually quite good. I didn't do a ton of volume between the two. This year we have one additional week, or was it one less? I think it's one last week this year between the races. So it's 9 weeks between the two this year, and last year was 10. So you have the one additional week you're working with last year. I think it is really important to think about how you do recovery. Like something I was glancing at with Esther and Fouchao's training in particular, where they took like 3 really low weeks, like almost a full week off, then a really low week, and then like really just bumping up back into kind of average training before diving into like the true brunt of UTMB training. And I think that's really important, is just like respecting where you're at in those moments as well. And making good use of like, maybe it is only a 3-week chunk that you're doing, but making sure that that's quality in your recovering, but really respecting that initial recovery the most.
Okay.
Yeah, it almost seems like the fitness part of things is done prior to Western States, and then 3 weeks of specificity for UTMB, get the legs ready for the downhill, and hope that was enough.
Because I wonder how much freshness is going to be a factor. Like when the dust has settled, we look at how things transpired. We look at the podiums, the winners. Will they be people who just dedicated the entire summer to this race? Will it be like Brett described, where maybe we see the top 4 women at Western run it back in perfect succession at UTMB? I'm like, this is that's another storyline for me, is like freshness versus just like toughing it out and making this double even more legit of a theme.
Well, and we're only talking about physical freshness right now. Like, what about the mental, aspect? Like, Tom said that was one of his biggest kind of, in hindsight, like aha moments last year after UTMB. It was like, oh, I had a great race at Western States, I'm just going to go run it back at UTMB. But then it's like, no, I wasn't actually really ready to like fully get in there and battle. Whereas like physically, he was probably pretty fine, at least good enough for top 10. You win Western States, you could physically probably be able to top 10 at UTMB. But like, mentally, how much are you willing to go back to that place, 9-10 weeks after doing it? And yeah, and that answer is going to be different for everyone. But something that we tend to see, I don't know, midway, 70% of the way through the race. We talked about like some of the important, like the cruxes of the course, and we've always kind of talked about like who looks really good coming into Courmayeur. And I think that's still important, but one spot that I've started to look at more is who looks good coming up and over and then down the Grand Col Ferret. That one's been almost more of an eye-opener to me than who looks okay out of Courmayeur. Because it just seems like that climb up to the top of Grand Col Ferret has like absolutely shattered people in the past.
And I think that's where Zach and Jim had that split last year late. Like I think Zach put like 15 minutes on him or something. I think, Jim ran the last 50K really well, but there was that split there for sure.
Yeah. And I do think like, for all the women who will be in the top 10 or battling for a top 10 spot, when you get to Art Nouveau, which is before you start climbing up to the Grand Col Ferret, the sun is up. The sun would have just came up on the section into Art Nouveau, and you're still only like 12 hours into the race, 13 hours into the race. And like, if you're somebody that's running like 25 hours, like a lot of the women in, 4 through 7 will be, like, you still have like that same amount of time left to go. So there's a lot of race left. And I think that can be a common mistake, is people are kind of wiped by the time they get to Art Nouveau or on top of Grand Col Ferret, and before they even begin descending down to La Folie and then ascending up to Champay Lock. So I think you really have to like be in it and feel good truly, because it starts to get away from you. But I will say, like, just from personal experience last year, and I know there was a lot of movement up in more of like the front of the women's field from like 1st through 5. There tends to be, and like maybe this year we'll see it be different, but like 7 through 10 at UTMB tends to spread out quite a bit to have these like 30-minute gaps between each other, where they're almost these like safe positions by Champay Lock, and you just kind of need to survive from there to the finish and like secure your spot. And you can almost see that throughout the years in results. And it's kind of comforting in some ways if you are in one of those positions, but I know that script is going to change one of these years where there's a lot more movement back there and things are getting a little tighter.
So people kind of start playing defense sometimes around that spot. I guess too is when if someone in front of you drops out and there was a 5-minute gap to you and the person, then all of a sudden they disappear and now it's a 15-minute gap to the person in front of you, or this person right behind you drops out. Now all of a sudden I'm 30 minutes up on 9th place.
Yep.
Yeah, that changes things. That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's like, unless you're feeling like complete garbage, there's not a ton of people that are moving like 30 minutes faster than you on any given section late into the race. So it's definitely an interesting position to be in. And we could talk about like how some of the women have run this race in the past and things like that. But if I were lining up on the start line this year, racing UTMB, and you know me, I'm just really good at getting in the back half of top 10 of races. I would want to line up next to Maite Mayora. She's gotten third and fifth at UTMB and running just like really calculated 25 and change races on 2 occasions now. And you can almost, I know we shouldn't be speaking about races by like time guarantees of like, oh, if you run 25 something, you're in the top 10. But like she's done that 2 times and she's run the race extremely well both times, moving up extraordinarily throughout. One of my favorite stats I found on her from last year was she caught 11 people between Arnouva and climbing up to Grand Col Ferret.
Wild.
And like that's a part where people aren't feeling that good. And like she just kept gaining people throughout the race. I think she moved up 72 spots from Courmayeur to the finish last year across the whole field, which I think is just amazing. And that's how I would love to run UTMB. She passed me like I was standing still last year and I was like, dang it, that's who I would love to be right now. But I think if I were lining up as a woman and like I wanted to be in a comfortable top 10 spot, I would kind of cue off of her.
That is like the equivalent Ludo stat when I think he started the race in whatever 44th, 46th place, ultimately finishes in 5th, just textbook, so moving up with efficiency and actually like getting into contention. Pretty cool. Another storyline, Katie Schide brings the fireworks as a late entrant to this race, shaking things up. I mean, I'm sure there was chatter about whether she ultimately would do this, but it's official. She's in. And I think there's a lot of questions here. Like, obviously, she has a historic Western States performance under her belt. Can she be recovered enough? Is an 85 to 90% August 2024 Katie better than 100% August 2022 Katie? Both of those performances took place in the Coupe Air, and I feel like the switch for her really came in like the fall of 21. But yeah, what do you guys think? Like, Brett, what are your thoughts here?
Dude, this is like, it's like the upside down of Jim Walmsley, where Katie's living in France, wins UTMB, and then's like, I need to spend more time in the States if I want to win Western States. And then on the second year, wins Western States and is like, I'm curious, if Katie doesn't win Western States this year, does she attempt UTMB? Or is the only reason she's doing UTMB because she's double eligible now and has the opportunity to win both? Like, I wonder if she even runs UTMB if she doesn't win Western States. But now it's like the door's open for that. We got to try and, we got to at least, match what has been done in the past. And I think, gosh, I forget, I lost the number somewhere, but we were talking about like, how fast does Katie need to run at UTMB to have a cumulative faster time than Courtney's Western States UTMB from last year?
Yeah.
And I wonder if, I can't imagine Katie's actually thinking that much about the exact numbers of everything and like comparing things like that. But it's like, if we're trying to get into that like GOAT type category, we got to be doing GOAT type things.
And again, I'm only speaking as a fan. I have to assume if I was a pro athlete, I would have a rough sense of exactly what I'm doing in January of a calendar year. And I feel the same way about Courtney. I feel like with Courtney, she probably had it at some point in the back of her head in January 2023 that the triple could be a thing. I doubt that like it was one of those ad hoc things where like, okay, I won Western, let's do Hard Rock. Okay, I won Hard Rock, let's do. I feel like maybe it was there, like the blueprint. But what do you think, Leah?
Yeah, so I think with most seasons, like what Katie had in mind, she's racing Western States, that's on the docket. She knows what she wants to do there. I think she's likely thinking of it in like an if-then scenario of sorts. Like, if I win Western States, then do I feel good? If yes, then let's see what I can do at UTMB. I think what's interesting about Katie is like she's already won both races. So I'd imagine the way her mind is thinking about UTMB is, can I win both of these in the same season? And likely, can I improve on my initial time? My third time at UTMB when she won, which I think was 23:15.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if she's going to continue to need to like challenge herself with new challenge, this is a new challenge. I mean, simply just winning UTMB as its own A race or Western States as its own A race, of those boxes have been checked. Bummer that Katie's gone Strava dark for this training block. I would love to see what kind of training she's doing, because she leveled up her training so much from last year's Western States to this year's, and that was so fun to see. Just like everything from pre-Canyons 100K to the week right after Canyons 100K to the few big weeks out of Flagstaff. It's like, man, I can only imagine what Katie is doing right now, getting ready for UTMB this year.
One last thing, at least from me, about sort of the Katie Schide storyline here. By the way, Brett, I love the reverse Walmsley branding. That's amazing. We got to go with that. But I think about what's different in her situation since 2022, and she became a great runner. Like, I think until 2022, she was super comfortable in the mountains. That was always her jam. And I think there's a lot to be said about going to Flagstaff for 2 consecutive springs, getting 2 really good Western States under your belt. And like we were saying at the top of the program, I think there is more running economy required than maybe people would give this race credit for. And I think it just makes her, again, like a more complete runner. We saw the versatility at OCC last year. Like, she got second place at OCC after a really taxing Western. I get the sense that she's probably feeling like she absorbed this second Western pretty well. She was defending her PhD thesis, I'm pretty sure, like in the summer leading up to that 2022 UTMB. So like, I think there's just like, she's fully a pro now. I'm really excited. She's got wheels. Like, she has that like mountain running background plus the wheels of the last 2 years. I think it's a really interesting, dangerous combination. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think regarding her Strava darkness, Brett, we like got like the slightest snippet of like what the beginning of her UTMB training was about to look like on Strava, and so you can kind of get like a glance of like what did week 1 of UTM build look like, and I think that was a 30,000 foot week, so 10,000 meters or so for our metric friends, but pretty amazing. Like, that is a few weeks after Western States. She had 2 good down weeks, but I'm assuming she just like built from there. So I understand likely wanting to preserve that, like the mental side of things coming into UTMB, and really just wanting your training to be your own without eyes on it. We see a ton of like the men in the field do that as well, and a bunch of the Euros too. So yeah, not privy to a lot of people's training in this preview show.
Since we've kind of started creating this category of the very well-rounded, versatile athlete, with Ruth Croft and Katie Schide, I had 2 other names that were in that category for me. Maybe there's more to add. Fact check me on this one, but oh my gosh, I have so many pages of names here that like I just keep getting lost. Oh,
dude, you're
Annalise Rousseau. Annalise Rousseau is another one who's very speedy, has had some like world-class sub-ultra performances, but then also second at Hard Rock in 2023. I think second at Grand Raid the previous year. 2014 CCC champ, just for like longevity's sake. 4th in 2018. And then the other one was Blandine Leah Rondell, who was OCC champ, CCC champ, and then 3rd at UTMB last year, and has done a ton of short races since last year's UTMB. Just for like UTMB indexed races, she has done 10 like either 50K or shorter races and won 9 of them.
Yeah.
And during UTMB last year, like I mentioned earlier in the show, that first 30K to Lake Contamine is really runnable. And she was running with Courtney, like within seconds of Courtney for that whole first 30K. So like, she's not like Blandine, for example, is somebody that's not afraid to lead, especially leaning into her strengths as well, like especially the runnable stuff. But she is good at just about everything. Also the world mountain running champ on the long course a few years back as well.
It would be really nice to have the confidence to know that you could go out in the first 30K with the lead pack pretty much no matter what, knowing you're going to burn either the same or less matches than anyone else around you.
Yes. And this brings me to my first segment of the race split, which one of my questions for this year's race is, will anybody run faster than Katie Schide's course record on that segment, which was 6:31 pace for the first 5.5 miles along the river trail with 550 feet. And that's fast. So many people, especially in these weeks leading up to UTMB, like train on that path, and Katie still has like all the crowns on those longer sections just from her UTMB in 2022. So curious if anybody will go out faster. Marianne, I think, has the second fastest time on that split from 2022 as well. And being in that race last year and seeing how fast people go out, I expect people to go out similarly this year. They're not going to let up.
I don't know if I see anyone doing that other than just Katie again. Like if not Katie,
Marianne?
Yeah, they could, but would they? Or would they?
The first time kind of stayed with contact, so I could see her.
Yeah. Another speedster that kind of has gotten over, Esther Chilon. Very quick. Another one who could roll 6:30 pace for the first 10K and not burn too many matches as well.
Yeah, I am curious about Esther a little bit going into this. So she did have a DNF last year after trying to double back after Western States. I do think she's in like a better headspace with things this year. I did see on her Strava that she might have come down with COVID a couple weeks back and looks like she's jumped back into training, but I'd imagine that has likely impacted in some portion training and recovery and just generally high heart rate recovery since then, especially already on like a likely weakened immune system from doing like that intensive training for an entire summer from Western States into UTMB. So curious if that will end up having an impact come race day.
Wasn't her DNF from last year also due to sickness, like starting sick or
kind of like mentally?
Like
I think it was like mental, like just drained, missing her girls that she had spent a pretty decent amount of the summer away from, and just wanted to spend some time with them. So I think it kind of speaks to that mental energy and just mental freshness that you need to be lining up with as well.
I think, you talk about the sort of segments that may be up for grabs in this race. It reminds me that I should give one of my bold predictions for the women's race. I guess it's two-part. The first is that the entire top 10 this year runs under 26 hours. The entire podium runs under 23. And 22:15 wins it. I believe that this is a watershed year for the women's race. I believe that it lines up perfectly with Western States in terms of competitiveness, following through on talent, and it's my stone cold lock. I'm locking into those two numbers.
Can we run those numbers back with like last year's results in reference?
I also will say, if we want to run the tape, I made similar bold predictions on Western States finishing times, and I'm not going to wave the flag, but they came true.
It's true. It's true.
I think we'll see a winning time under like right around 23 hours, I think, on the women's side of things. I don't think we would see a whole podium under 23 hours. I think we would see maybe a podium under 24 hours. I could see that likely happening. And then I think top 10, 26:30 or lower.
I just think because my other prediction that's kind of bold is that there are no surprises in the top 10, that it's a truly professionalized top 10, and everyone that's top 10ing, you could make an argument that on any given day, they also could have podiumed or even won the race. I don't know if there's 10 deep that could win the race, but I feel like there's 10 deep that could podium.
Totally.
And so I think that's what's driving this idea in my head that we're going to just see this massive step function in performance, kind of like CCC 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's funny how like I've got a few people who are like, maybe have raced at UTMB, but this is their first UTMB, who maybe would be considered dark horses, but at the same time are like certified heavy hitters. Like I've got like Abby Hall, who runs for Adidas Terex, has 3 top 10s at CCC. It's like, how could you be considered a dark horse? Or even someone like someone very like relatively newer to the sport, like Helen Mino Faulkner. Like, are they a dark horse? Even though they like run for Hoka, the title sponsor of the race, and was 3rd at CCC last year. The biggest question mark I would say is like, this is their 100-mile debut.
I think in order to start getting into some of the names, we should go into some of these one-off prediction categories. And let's lead with dark horse. I'll go first. My dark horse in the women's field is Fiona Port.
Oh, that's mine.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So let the record show that I came up with this before Leah. We were not talking offline. Fiona Port. And, won Lavredo last year. I think what sealed the deal for me on making this a dark horse pick is you would have need to have followed the Maxi race, but she really pushed Cami Brias pretty hard in that race. Most people in this audience know who Cami Brias is. Had a great race at Hard Rock this past year. Was really putting pressure on her. 2nd at TDS last year in a pretty strong field. Won that Maxi race in 23. When I say dark horse, I mean like I think she would be a surprise selection in the top 10. I don't have her on my sort of like podium watch, but I'd love to hear what you think, Leah, on that front.
No, I was definitely thinking, like she's not a dark horse to especially anybody that's in France and has been following her running for some time. This will be her first UTMB. So like perhaps, she might be a dark horse in like the UTMB context of things, but her Lavaredo was awesome last year. I think beating out Maryline Nakache from France as well, who's a really strong runner. And Emma Stewart from Ireland, who's also lining up at UTMB as well, who I think is another really interesting runner. I think she's a farming veterinarian. So some cool runners out there too. But I think Fiona's going to be really exciting. I think she's one of those women that in my mind is a lock for the top 10. Don't know where she will be, but I wouldn't be surprised if she does mix it up, especially in that like top 5 battle early on.
Who you got, Brett?
I'm going to answer my own question. Helen Mino Faulkner. I think if you go to her, UTMB profile, she does not have an index score for the 100-mile distance. Like that by definition has got to be dark horse, to have no result score for this distance. And, in the past 2 years, CCC was 12.5 hours for her. That was just about double the length of any other race she did prior to that. And it seemed to work fine. So I'm like, okay, let's just like, I know we're not doubling the distance, but we're probably going to double the time. Let's just double the time again. Like Helen ran so like calm last year. Like her vibes at CCC just seemed very chill. Like not rushed, very relaxed, like flowy. And those are all good things when moving up in distance. So I'm hopeful for a breakout performance at UTMB by Helen Mino Faulkner.
And she's got to be one of the very few who don't have, like, especially in like the ones to watch category, without 100-mile experience. Like Fiona Port, she's lined up with TDS, which in my mind, TDS it's 100 miles pretty much.
Yeah.
So it's really no different than UTMB. So Helen, this is like big jump up in distance for her, especially like you mentioned by time. So I think that'll be, just like a little bit of a question mark for her. Her training's been awesome. She's been spending some time out on course, doing some pretty hefty runs. I think something Helen stands by is like truly going extremely easy in her training runs, and really just like respecting that pace herself. So I think we mentioned like coming out to Chamonix weeks prior, it's like really easily to get like sucked into like group run pace, things like that. So I think Helen's somebody that does a good job of just like respecting where she's at and respecting what she needs to perform well. And I think I like that a lot about her training.
One of the other big variables with like jumping from CCC to UTMB that I'm curious about your take on this, Leah, is like, not only is it, if you have a great day at UTMB, you're like doubling your great day at CCC in terms of time, but CCC, you get a much more regular race start time, like was it 9 a.m. Whereas UTMB, you get 6 p.m. How much, like how different was that for you, like starting at 6 p.m.? Well, you run in the evenings.
Yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask.
I was like, yeah, because like that, you were built for this actually. But that's got to be something that like I personally would need to practice a lot, is like a 6 p.m. run start, going straight into like 100% certainty a full night of running.
It's not easy. And I think the like structuring your day prior to that 6 p.m. start is important. Treating it like it's the morning is important. I personally love night running so much, and I do so much of it, so I'm comfortable doing it. But if you're somebody that doesn't do a lot of like headlamp running, like not getting stressed out by those little pieces is really important. Like how do you, work your headlamp if the batteries go out and like it's windy and raining up on the pyramids and it's dark and miserable and you're trying to get your jacket on, but you still need to eat. So like just being able to like keep your cool in the night whenever like you're getting lots of things thrown at you to manage. I think for somebody that's new to the 100-mile distance, just all the controllables that can like stack up over time in a race that you really need to manage. I think that's the hardest part if this is your first 100.
Yeah. The question for those who are listening, and like just submit your answers to the Singletrack Instagram DMs, is like, for an evening start race, like how do you plan your pre-race dump? Like, let me know how you schedule that out. Just send that answer to Run Singletrack's DM.
We've actually changed our handle to Conversational Pace. You can redirect
at Hornig 91.
Next category, most likely to surprise, positive or negatively. Mine is positive, and this might be a surprise. Shang Vuzhou. And the reason I say Shang Vuzhou as my positive surprise is because, and maybe part of the blame falls on me, myself, being a member of the media. I feel like her second place performance at Western States, the third fastest run ever, fell a little bit under the radar. Like comparatively, Rod's got a lot of publicity.
Totally.
Katie got a lot of publicity. Jim did. And she ran an unbelievable race. Bonkers. I think it would not surprise me if she's kind of riding this wave, Leah, that you talked about, kind of jumping back into training pretty efficiently. It wouldn't shock me if she could get on the podium here. And, we could be talking about like a Katie 1-1 and like a Vuzhou 2-2 or 2-3.
Totally. And I 100% agree with that. Like, I would not be the least bit surprised if like we saw her win the race. Like, I think she's strong. She's incredibly resilient, and she's improved every single year she's been at UTMB. Last year, placing as high as 4th in podium contention a lot of the day before, kind of like battling it out with Blandine later in the race, and staying in her 4th position towards the end, but only 28 minutes off a podium spot. I think like her training just kind of like stacks and stacks and stacks on itself. She does a lot of flatter, faster running when she's back in China, and also is like well-versed in the mountains and like can do it all. And I'm really, really excited to see kind of how she responded after Western States. I almost think she was relatively unfazed by it, even though it was like this mega performance that I agree did not get the attention it deserved. But I think it set herself up for success in this training block. And I liked her recovery period that she had after Western States too, before jumping back in.
Who's your surprise, Leah?
I guess not a surprise to me, but Katarzyna Solinska, who was in 6th place last year in the race. up until the race was just an ambassador for On Running. And after her 6th place performance, became an athlete with them. So I think at that time was extremely under the radar, but she is such a strong climber, strong descender. She's just extremely talented. Ran a really well executed race last year. Has been doing really similar training to what she put down last year. Several hundred some mile weeks with good vert. Puts in a lot of cycling in her training as well. Like I see a lot of athletes in the field doing something similar, but her 6th place last year I thought was astounding, and I think we'll see her again in the top 10 this year. So that might not be a surprise to some, but I think like she still kind of stands out as like a dark horse who's kind of understated in the field.
That's a really good one. That's a great one.
Did we have a comeback performance, or can
Got
this
that
count?
too.
Oh, we
didn't get there yet, but we can talk about that too.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, like, my just positive surprise, I think is going to be the return of Marianne Hogan.
Oh yeah.
Which, because she was like 2nd at UTMB, but it was like a rough 2nd for her. Was on track to more or less blow the race out of the water, and then just I think she shredded her hip, her labrum or something like that, and then had to walk most of the last climb and descent, and still somehow held on to 2nd, and then had a fairly lengthy rehab process and just a lot of learnings, and has already strung together some pretty solid races. And it's funny how how we've said how fast this sport has moved in the last 12 to 18 months. It almost feels like Marianne Hogan's been forgotten about. She was in the old guard, but that was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah. The year that she got podium at both Western States and UTMB.
Exactly, that double is nuts, and
ancient history.
So I'm excited to see Marianne come back and almost certainly race with a level of confident aggression at the front, with no fear, and those oftentimes lead to very good results.
Yeah, I think something about Marianne too, last year, I think she was also coming then back from a stress fracture as well. So got her season off to a pretty late start, but put together a really good Ultra Trail Cape Town, where she went out with Ruth, who, had strung together an entire season's worth of training for UTMB, couldn't line up a UTMB, resurfaced that training for Cape Town. And Marianne went right out with Ruth there, hung with her for a bit, and ended up having a pretty strong 2nd place and a good battle with a Katerina Mitiev. So I think we see all 3 of those women in the race this year, which will be exciting. But then Marianne then lined up at Transvolcania this year and had a little bit rough, I think 6th place finish there, but then came back a few weeks later at the Swiss Canyon, I think 100K race, and won that. And just has been on the up and up. And I think she'll even say it herself, how she's just reformatted her training entirely this last year to stay healthy. And what that looks like for her is a lot of cycling integrated into her training. So she's no stranger to putting down 24 to 30 hour weeks that combine both running and cycling. And I think it's been working really well for her.
I think we maybe have time for one more of these. Then we can do our podium kind of winner picks, because we still have to do the men's field, which is wild. There's just so much to talk about at UTMB. Let's do book it. Our most confident prediction. Actually, I don't want to do book it because that could end up being a winner or a podium. How about best team performance? Let's do best team performance on the women's side. I'm going to go Hoka, and I'm looking at Helen Minot-Faulkner, Esther, Fujao, Manon. It's dispersed in the field, but that seemed because we're looking at Fantasy Free Trail before this episode, looking at the UTMB live website. There's not a massive contingent among any of the brands. I feel like Hoka has the most collective, so I went Hoka here. Brett, what do you think?
Give me Adidas Terex, just to be different, and also because, well, it's hard to compete against the numbers of Hoka, but Terex has Emily Hawgood, Ekaterina Mitiev, Ruth Croft, and Abby Hall. that's a solid squad of 4 right there.
I think
It'll be a battle.
last year, I'm pretty sure at UTMB, there was, for the women, it was there was no duplicate brands, which was cool.
Yes. Yeah.
This year, I think there will be 2 Adidas Terex in the top 10, 2 Hokas, and that'll be like the maximum of any brand.
So we're going to have to go to the time tiebreaker, like at Worlds.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Or the 3rd place.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. It does seem like Terex and Hoka on the women's side have the most numbers, especially at the front.
All right, podium and winner picks. I'll go first. This was extraordinarily tough for me. And like you said, Lee, at the top of the conversation, I am bracing myself for these just to absolutely go to dust and, nothing to be correct. My winner is Katie Schide, very closely followed by Ruth. I think that this race ends up, when we look back in history, it's going to just be this amazing battle between Katie Schide and Ruth that's going to inspire generations of athletes to come. We're going to look back at this race and be like, that was sick. In the same way that like the whole like Rod and Jim back and forth was amazing at Western this year. I think it'll be just a classic battle. And then I've got Sheng Wushao in 3rd to round out the podium, which it's a little safe. It's a little predictable. I'm going to take Katie as long as she's at the top. She's generational. It's her and Courtney, although Ruth could be there too. But I'm going to take Katie as long as she's on this hot streak. She's had an amazing year.
I have the same podium. I went 5 because I had like every other runner was a Western States from this year. So I had like Katie. I think this is Katie's race to lose this year, and I don't think she does. I don't know, just from a confidence level, fitness level. I mean, it's going to be an amazing battle. I don't think she's going to get to just solo a huge amount of the race like she did at Western States. And then I've got Ruth in 2nd, Shang Fuzhou 3rd. I've got Marianne Hogan in 4th, and then 5th I'm going Emily Hawgood, which was also my bookend prediction of like what's gonna happen. And I was like, Emily Hawgood will be in the top 10.
Yeah.
To have like 4 years of incredible Western States UTMB doubles.
Yeah. Okay. I've got Ruth winning. I think like just the sole focus that she's had now for 2 years straight on this, I think that'll kind of reign supreme when it comes to just execution and mental freshness. So yeah, I think we'll see that. I think Katie Schide in 2nd. I think Shang Fuzhou in 3rd, and then I'll go 5 here too. And I'm going to go with, I don't have these written down. This is just what I'm going with at this moment in time. I think we'll see Ekaterina Mityev in 4th. She was 4th here in 2019. I think we'll see her there again. And then either Fiona Port or Maite Mayora in our 5th place position.
Awesome. Before we go to the
something we
men's...
didn't get to talk a lot about was Manon Bohard. She DNF'd her last 2 times here, did win TDS. She was running in the lead pack last year, like the kind of chase pack behind Courtney, I guess, for a lot of the race. Curious. I think we will see her in the top 10, maybe not in one of those top 5 positions, like the ones I just mentioned.
Yeah.
But I think she'll be in the mix this year, and she's a really strong runner from France.
She was having a really good race until she got hurt, right?
Her ceiling is very high.
Yeah.
She's had kind of bad luck at UTMB.
Yeah.
They've been like the only blips on her race resume in the last, 4 or 5 years.
Before we go to the men's field, just a couple stats to read off from Aid Station Fireball. If people in the audience kind of want to timestamp things, have sort of expectations for zones as people finish. Historically, if you look at the women's spread, with some exceptions, 2018 being one of them, very tight race, it's gradually decreased in the last 10 years from nearly a 6-hour average spread to 4 hours separating first through 10. So that's interesting. I'll be watching very intently to see if that closes dramatically again this year. And then typically 30-ish hours would get you just inside the top 10 years ago. Now you need to be at least 27:30 I think it's going to be well into the 26s. My prediction was sub 26, but just interesting timestamps to watch for. But yeah, going into the men's field, top storylines. I guess just like the first one is the target on Jim's back. He's finally a champion here. He he lived this course, this region for 2 years, got it done. What do you think, Brett? Is he defending this thing? Is it going to be tougher than last year?
Before we go into is he defending this thing? I mean, one thing that's interesting is, he chose, when we talked to him at Western States, we were like, are you going to fly to Europe immediately after States and start your UTMB training? He's like, no, I'm going to do most of my UTMB training over in the San Juans. So kind of going back to our earlier conversation of like, how much time do you need to spend on the course? Jim doesn't think he needs to spend that much time on the course for this year. But yeah, the double, he's double eligible, and Killian's the only male who has done that, right? 2011, Killian Jornet.
Yep.
Yeah, there's been the Hard Rock UTMB double, which we have Ludo being eligible for that this year, which is cool that we have kind of two different double storylines that culminate at UTMB to see who can be the actual double champion. What do you got, Leah?
So what's this question? Will anyone seriously challenge interesting storylines?
Yeah, I would say like the ability for Jim to come back here and defend his title, whether it's going to be a tougher time this go around for any number of reasons.
Yeah. No, I think, what we saw at Western States was like Jim appeared vulnerable to his competitors a bit. People saw that they can indeed run with Jim and they can make moves. They can break him a little bit. And he's not completely off limits. The men's field is wild this year. We're seeing 15 of the top 20 returning. And that is like 15 men who likely want to improve on what they've done the years prior, and who could very well like run a risky race in order to make those improvements. I think we're seeing a lot of people just like believe in themselves, believe in their training, and believe in their abilities to like put all the controllables together on race day. And if that means they're running an aggressive race and trying to run with Jim, then they might try it. Something that was cool about Western States that I like picked up on after the fact was it felt like Jim like didn't really treat aid stations at Western States like quite as efficiently and fast and rapid as a lot of his other competitors. Almost treated it like it was a UTMB aid station in some ways, like taking his time, taking care of himself. I think that will treat him well at UTMB, like being in practice of taking the necessary time to take care of yourself. I could see some people who might be like in the heat of a race at UTMB and being a little bit more aggressive, forgetting to take care of themselves in some of those imperative aid stations. So just something to keep an eye on, and like something to be mindful of is like people not getting like too risky for the racing aspect, and really like still remembering that they have 108 miles to run.
Two observations from me. The first, Brett, you were highlighting the importance of sort of mental strength, mental resourcefulness earlier in the episode. And Jim had this comment, I think it might have been during our Western States interview, but he basically said that like 2024 has been the finest mental season of my life. And I'm more appreciative of winning these races on tactics and sort of just like that place in my mind, and less on time trialing things and getting caught in a maze of like, trialing this particular section of the course and then going down this like dark alleyway that I have to like see if I can get myself out of. Like he seemed, if there was ever any point in his career, in my opinion, where he could win a race on this like 85 to 90% of himself zone, I think it would be this year. Like he has also said on the record that he's coming into this race banged up. He's had some inflammation issues. This summer has not been smooth post Western States, but he's like not worried, or it's not going to like dissuade him from being on the start line. And then I also think these top athletes, especially when there's like the king, which is Jim right now, they tend to be copycats. And we typically lament like, oh my gosh, everyone's following Jim. They all want to do whatever, like 150-mile weeks. They want to follow Zach doing 50K a vert a week. But like now the king is like saying, no, let's like step things back. Let's smooth things out. And I think because of what Jim is publicly saying, maybe we see more people in the race appreciating a more tactical like undertaking, and they also smooth things out. And, you know, there's less of this typical just people like blowing themselves up early and running outside their fitness, etc. I could see that happening, especially if the trend is following the leader.
Is Jim like coming to terms and being okay with tactics, like the equivalent of Happy Gilmore learning how to putt?
Just tap it
He's
in.
like, someone learned how to putt. Like Jim learned how to not front run and still win. I don't know. I think there might be something to that. And you're right. Like that lends to an even more dangerous Jim Walmsley. Oh, and I think it's pronounced him, actually.
Soft
him
J.
Walmsley. It's a soft J. Well, no, because I was, we talked about how, a lot of maybe Jim's competitors learned, oh, Jim is a little bit vulnerable at Western States. Like people passed Jim and stayed in front of him for a while and saw Jim later on in the race than anyone had ever seen him in terms of a competitor standpoint. On the other hand, is Jim learning that he, maybe was like, oh, wow, I wasn't able to run away from everyone. People were putting time on me at aid stations, but I was still able to come back, run them down, and at the end of the day, win the thing. Does that give him even more confidence now, like looking back at it? Because I feel like old Jim, like, kind of like brash front runner Jim, I feel like maybe this performance gets in his head, even though he still won. He's like, they were too close to me. I wonder if this new like Euro Jim is like, yeah, they were close to me, but I still found a way to beat them. I can do that at UTMB too.
Yeah. Leah, any other interesting storylines for you on the men's side worth discussing?
We saw a lot of Western States doublers on the women's side, not a ton on the men's side. I think maybe Jim and then G Duo from China, who was our 12th place finisher at Western States. But what we do see a lot of is a lot of people running Lavaredo on the men's side for prep for UTMB. I think 8 of the top 10 from Lavaredo this year are all running UTMB. So I think that's
a big list of
same
returners.
Weekend as Western States. It's a good tune-up, 100K, a lot of similar trails in the Dolomites that you'll find in the Alps. So I think it's a largely French contingent that was included in that top 10, those 8 guys, but they're all back and coming to UTMB. So I think that'll be more of the storyline on the men's side. I also see like a really heavy French contingent on the men's side in general. Like my hot take will be that we'll see like 5 Frenchmen in the top 10 for UTMB this year, which I don't think is like that rare by any means, but there's a lot of them.
It's kind of how it used to be.
Yeah, a lot of them who are just like consistent back half of the top 10 performers, just really solid at UTMB races especially. So I think that's likely what we'll see this year as well.
2 other men that are doing the Western States UTMB double are Dang Guomin, who was 14th at States, and then Jia Shang, who was
good
8th. Our boy Shen, who was 2nd at CCC last year after I think 4th place finish at the 2023 Western States. So no stranger to this double, just making their, I think, debut at UTMB.
Yeah, and I think our only non-returners from the top 10 are Zach Miller and Tyler Green from last year. So really solid 8 guys returning as well. And that's Jim, Germain, Matthew Blanchard, Ludo, Thibaut Grivier, Hannes Nürnberger, Arthur Joyo Bouillon, and Baptiste Chassad. Oh gosh, Chassad from France.
And to piggyback off your other stat of like 15 of the top 20 are returning, there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 7 names written down who DNF'd last year, who like have the potential to be in the top 10 who are also coming back this year.
Who are they?
So Tom Evans, Ben Demon, Miguel Haras, Jonas Rusi, Pau Capel, Dan Guomin, and Jeff Mogavera.
Okay.
Yeah. All people who are coming back who dropped out last year.
It's a good find.
Yeah. My categories this year got a little bit like weird because I like never know what my categories are going to be. Because I started writing down the returners and then I was like, oh, well, this person technically is a returner, even though they didn't finish last year. So then I was like, I have my returners from 2023, my DNFs from 2023, my returners from UTMB, but didn't race in 2023. So like our UTMB alumni, and then any newcomers.
I just have France.
Frauds. You guys know that the Miss America, not Miss America, Miss World, Argentina, United States. That's how I imagine you have it written on your Google Doc. It's just like 800-point font, bold, underline, all caps.
Pretty much what it is.
Cool.
Oh, good talk.
Okay, I have a question that kind of goes parallel with this prediction. Is there anyone who could potentially front run this race and give themselves a chance to just like break everyone in the field? Like we saw Pau Capel do in 2019. Like, is there anyone who could potentially be strong enough and ballsy enough to like run the sting out of Jim
Germain.
and potentially everyone else? You think Germain would? You think he would front run this race?
I think he would. Yeah, I think he's got the experience now too, and just that comfort of running in that lead pack, and just like a really good why right now too. Placed third last year running 2010, which was I think about 30 minutes off the winning time, but in a time that would have won in all but 2 editions of the race on like this same race course. I think he's currently Strava Dark, so hard to say exactly what he's doing because he was coming back from some broken ribs back in June or July. But he's been 9th here, 5th here, 3rd, has had a DNF, and I think he's just like moving up the ranks and seeing what his potential is. And you could tell that every year he's training with UTMB as his focus. So I think we'll kind of see that shine, and I don't think he'll be afraid to give it a go. Something I was reading in one of his Instagram posts was just talking about when he was chatting with his doctors about his return to running after his rib injury, was just like, they're like, how about like end of July you could start running? He's like, how about July 1st? And just like really pushing them a little bit to be like, let's see what I can handle. And I think he's going to race a similar way of like, why not? Let's see what I can handle.
Yeah. He's hit all the prime numbers except for one.
Every single one of them.
7.
Finn, what do you think
about Germain?
Or no, like anyone else? Do you think Germain's most likely?
I'll stay on Germain for a second. And we got it on video, but there's that amazing scene, I think, right in Champs-Élysées where Jim is making that definitive final pass on Germain. And, in this age of social media, if I was someone like Germain, I'd probably have that, on my desktop before every single key session in the lead up to UTMB, just recreating that moment and being like, not this time around, not this time. This is not happening. I've learned my lesson. So talk about a target on someone's back. I feel like anybody that was in Jim's wake in the second half of the race last year, I guess Zach isn't here to try again, but Germain is. And so I love that carrot in front of him. The other person that I'm really stoked on, again, this is all based on primary experience. Talked about it in the Discord, but I'm a big admirer of Aurelian. His hard rock, he made hard rock look like not the PhD level race that it is.
Yeah. He made it look easy.
Race. He walked into the gym and just like was like, all right, what's next? Are we like going on a bike ride or something? It was insane. And like when I think about the heir apparents for this race, people challenging Jim and Katie, besides Germain, it's Aurelian there for me. And I think people might look at his results and be like, what happened at Maxi? Like, why aren't you also winning elsewhere? I just think he's like 100-mile mountain specialist. And there's also something to be said about peaking at the right time.
Yeah.
I hate to bring up Lance Armstrong, but like Lance, he every year was about the Tour de France for like 6 or 7 years. And I think you'll start to see something like that in our sport. And I feel like, Aurelian is probably doing what he needs to do to be ready for this race. In the same way that Tom Evans is probably not losing sleep over not winning Lavaredo, but still feeling like he could win UTMB. Aurelian. To me, it's Aurelian, Tom, Germain, and Jim.
I don't see Tom as a person to front run the race.
No,
not to front run. Yeah.
But like as a favorite to win. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. I think, first I want to correct you on your prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
Not, like literally none of the ones you mentioned. But yeah, Tom, I think it is.
Finn fails at public math.
I never made it
yet
past
again.
Trig. Okay. I never made it past Trig.
Oh no, we suck again.
But I think something that Tom mentioned in his like No Stone Unturned YouTube video was just about how he felt like he raced UTMB a little like arrogantly last year, and that this time around he's going to race a bit more patiently and kind of run more his race, which I think will be interesting. Totally agree with you about Aurelian, Finn. I think 100-mile specialist, he knows what he needs to do at this distance. I thought it was funny. I think he recently took a Jim Strava CR on course, and I don't know if the French translation into English was entirely accurate, but it was like something like, "Sorry, Jim, you will take revenge soon."
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty cute.
I did like that. I've got another name to throw in the potential front runner bucket. Dmitry Mitiev.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I'm worried about his nutrition after 100K. And I've also heard he's not using poles for this race, which is a huge...
But have you seen those quads? Does he even need poles?
It's true. He has internal poles.
Maybe he'll just like break a couple trees out of the ground and just like... but
wait,
like the way he...
About nutrition.
Well, I just know, except for TDS, whatever it was 6 or 7 years ago, my understanding is that in really anything above the 100K distance, it's been a struggle for him to like dial in his nutrition. And maybe, that's something that's been at the forefront these past couple months. But I've just heard rumblings that like, that's the limiter. And if he can get past that, like watch out. But
okay. Well, if we get a good weather day, that helps a little bit. But also front running and like burning matches from the get-go, that does not help the nutrition side of things either. So, but I could totally see him trying. And then I could also totally see him tying, which was another hot take.
Yeah, what are the chances that we see hand holding in the top 10 at UTMB this year?
Oh, I can't wait to get into the predictions.
We'll hold off. Also, actually, I think we should since we didn't spend a lot of time on it on the women's side, maybe we do less of like the field analysis, more of our prediction categories on the men's side. Let's start with most surprising top 10 selection. I'm going Pau Capel. You mentioned his breaking 20 hours project, 4 or 5 years ago. He's had a really rough go of it these last 3 to 4 years. So much so that it's like one of those names that's like, you remember him from the past for greatness, but like, is it just the memory? And I believe, I'm not saying he's going to get in the top 3 or win this race, but I could see him meeting his fitness where it's at, running a really tactical race and breaking into the back half of the top 10. And he's my surprising selection, because I think in previous years it was like, is he winning podium or is he bust? And I think this is one of the years where it's just like veteran race runs into the top 10.
Okay.
Who you got, Brett?
My surprise, maybe even most improved as well from last year is Timo Tollefson.
Woo. Oh, nice. Timo.
I think Tim's going to run himself into the top 10 with like a classic, just like happy, good vibes race. Like I just have so many like the picture of Tim at UTMB that I remember is like backwards snapback hat, t-shirt, and like Hoka dirt biking gloves for just like the entire race and getting third. And I'm like, if Tim finds those vibes for this race, which I feel like he's been getting closer to that, in the last few years of kind of his rebuilding journey of running. I believe the fitness is there. We talked about how he got in a Great Western States training block, and then what did he get to do? He got to pace Rod. He got to like be there and see it without absolutely going deep to the well and trashing himself like as an actual participant in the race, but he got to like be in it. And like, he was so fired up when he was done pacing Rod, and like, that's got to count towards something.
Yeah. And something along those lines too is something that Tim like has had trouble nailing in recent years has been his nutrition. And what better person to pace at Western States than somebody who has just completely overhauled and nailed their nutrition in the last 2 races and like executed pretty perfectly because of nailing nutrition. So I think that's got to be a good piece. That's got to give Tim some feel-good points.
Yep, I think so. Yeah,
and
Mammoth is hot right now.
Mammoth is so hot right now. And I think Tim is at his best when he is under the radar or doubted and not put on this pedestal of like, okay, here's the 2-time UTMB podium finisher, Tim Tollefson. What's he going to do this year? It's like, I think there's been enough time between where he just gets to have fun again. And there's there's no strings attached. He could have a not great race and nothing changes about his legacy. This is all additive at this point. It'd just be cool to see like, oh, back in 2018, he podiumed, and oh shit, like 2024, like, log in whatever, a 7th or 8th place finish. That'd be an amazing storyline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The, no, that's gone. That's gone. Moving on.
And it's gone. Next category, dark horse performance. I took a pretty liberal interpretation of this for my picks. I actually extended this to talk about the top 20 because in the same way, you hear 200 is the new 100. I think top 20 at UTMB, both on the women's and the men's side, is going to become the top 10, the new top 10 in future years. And there's a couple people who I think will strategically target the top 20 and not necessarily the top 10, and they'll get there because they're not trying to run a top 10 race. This is a left field selection, but I'm saying Canyon Woodward here for a top 20 finish. If you look at Canyon's history at UTMB for Yes We Canyon, 47th in 2022, 28th in 2023, and I'm convinced that there is a different mindset and approach to this race when you're thinking top 20. I believe Canyon has the fitness to run under 24 hours. And so he is my dark horse pick to be a part of that American contingent that when we say the depth was deep, we talk about like not just well represented in the top 10, but like there was depth throughout the top 20, top 30. A lot of people cracking sub 24. I think he's one of the people leading the charge.
Yeah. And I know I had France in all caps on my sheet, and I could discuss all the nice Frenchmen who will be here too. But like, there's a good contingent of like deep American men running this year that might not be your podium contenders, but very well could be in your like 5 through 15 spots. I think one of those who I think could be a dark horse, if it all comes together on race day for him, is Jeff McGavero, who was second at Broken Arrow this year without much of a taper and has been putting in monster training. I really hope it like absorbs in his taper and he shows up like nice and mentally refreshed and feeling good. And I know he had like some odd motion sickness issues with some like headlamp running at Madeira this year. So I think he's working on solving those. But one of his back-to-back training runs that he went on recently, like maybe a week or two ago, was like a 35 miler with 11K, 38 miles with 11K, and then 23 miles with 10K. And he's been doing these like 2 to 3 weeks back to back with like 25 hours with like 30 to 40K vert. So he's putting in some of like the heftiest training I've seen. And I think he's surprised a lot of people with his Sierra Zinal race last year. I think it was top 15 there. So I think he's somebody that could surprise a lot of people if it all does come together on race day for him.
I think that's a great take. Yeah, he's
like that one.
Like the fit. He's almost like Rod in the sense where it's like the fitness is there, the training is there, the mentality is there. What are the last few little tweaks that need to get made on race day for all of that to actually show?
Next category, I've got most likely to surprise, and I adjusted mine to say most likely to surprise, parentheses, the Uroi committee. Drew Holman.
Drew Holman. Speaking of left field, Drew home run.
There is not a race that Drew Holman does. Leah, he's kind of like you in many respects, in that you can just count on him. Maybe he's also could be a book it pick for people here. He's incredible. He's incredibly consistent. I don't have him on the podium or winning this race, but damn sure I have him inside the top 10. And I have him most likely to surprise because I have a feeling there's probably 40% of the Uroi committee that's like, oh man, have you heard about this guy? So
like Drew, who? Holman? Are you saying Comb? One thing I will say about Drew though is I bet we see a slightly more aggressive Drew than we have in past big races because he has the opportunity to take down Jim. And that was like one of his main reasons for running Worlds last year. He was like so motivated to just go toe to toe with Jim in the mountains.
Wow.
Well, I don't know if he'll be aggressive necessarily though. Like I could see him queuing off of somebody like Dmitry Mityev, who I think he's raced before, like Cape Town. And somebody that he's performed similarly to in other races. I don't know if I could see him racing like super aggressively though.
I guess when I say aggressive, I don't mean like trying to break the field early, but like I think he'll like I'm sure we will see a men's lead pack develop early on and stay there. I predict we see Drew in that pack. Like silently stalking at the back of the pack, but there.
Yeah. So
it's like,
I guess a question is like, last year, we saw a decent amount of American men in the top 10, I think 3. If we were to see 3 again, which American men would they be?
I mean, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim.
I mean, Ben Demon's the other name.
Do you think? I think probably more like 2.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think, 1 or 2 American men in the top 10.
And then the rest are Frenchmen.
And then everyone else is from France.
Okay. What if we have deja vu from the 2022 Western States Forest Hill live stream, but it's at UTMB, it's at Champay Lock, and it's somebody actively trying to break Tom, and it's Drew Holman.
Oh
man.
That'd be cool.
He's like, you will not untie that shoe.
Somebody we haven't talked about yet is Matthew Blanchard. What's his status? I know he's Strava darkish. I believe he does a lot of cycling, and he just ran the People's Marathon at the Paris Olympics, which is pretty cool, and did a stage race in the Alps at the end of July. Something I saw that was cool. It seems like he was using that stage race to work on like 2 to 3 hour blocks of effort to work on his speed a bit. So kind of similar to what Tom was talking about with just like being well-rounded and having the little components that you focus on in the build-up. But we got to remember that he's a person that challenged Killian at UTMB with his then second place finish, and then was 4th here at UTMB last year. So curious to see
after Western States.
It
was a tired 4th.
Yeah.
And he's run sub 20 before. So he's fast.
Yeah, I can't help but think Matthew Blanchard will absolutely just be up there.
Yeah.
Bookend it.
Wait, we need your surprise picks. Leah, who's your surprise pick this year for any reason?
Well, I kind of said Jeff, but that was like dark horse.
Yeah.
Surprise. I guess this isn't a surprise. Ludo is in that top 10. Like,
Yeah,
not really
that
a
was who I had
surprise,
too.
but like he just did Hard Rock. That was a big effort. I think the biggest surprise for me was seeing that he did a 50-mile, what was it? Like 50 miles and then like 30 miles, then 30 miles in his training, covering the entire UTMB course in 3 days, like 3 weeks after Hard Rock.
Okay.
Dude, Ludo just loves the mountains.
Oh, wait, no, I do have a favorite. Do you guys have like a favorite moment of your research for this episode? Because I do. And
let me look through my notes and let me see.
Mine is Ludo made a reel on August 11th from his run from Champex-Lac to Chamonix, and the audio is Forever Young. And I just love Ludo so much. So I think that is what Ludo is. He's forever young. He's crushing it. He knows he's crushing it. And I think we'll see a really solid performance and a solid double of Hard Rock UTMB from him.
I think one of my favorite people in this race, that can be its own statement, and then continued to follow their training, has been Mike McMonagle.
Oh.
Like, 1, monster training block. 2, very well documentation of said monster training block.
Yeah.
Like
3, best training partner ever.
Yeah. And budding photographer.
Yeah, it's been a really good training block, and luckily I've been invited on like 75% of the runs that we've done together. So I've had a nice eye into what goes into it, and hopefully I don't fail him too bad crewing him.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm excited to see Mike just run up on people.
That's
start
the hope.
Destroying fools. Like, is Mike gonna run with a camera and like take pictures of all the souls that he crushes?
No, I wish.
Wait.
You do think like I think he'll be like in the mix of the women's race a good bit, so I think he'll have a lot of fun, and we'll probably get to see him on the live stream if he just hangs out in the women's race, and hopefully they're doing a good job covering the women in the race. And not
I was gonna say, like,
the case.
Yeah, no more wheels of cheese, please.
Please.
Mike's a fast media guy. He'll be helping the media race. Fast media guy. Fast media guy for sure. Ludo, most likely to surprise our modern understanding of genetics. All right. Let's see here. Rookie of the year. So they've never run UTMB. Mine is Thibaut Baronian. He's been an absolute artist at CCC the last couple of years. Super consistent there and making the step up finally to UTMB. Not much more to say. Just super talented. Knows the last 100K of the course, 50K of the course super well. And it's great. So he's mine. What you got, Leah?
That's who I've got.
Okay.
Give me Shen, Josh Shang.
Oh yeah.
Woo! Like he's run really well at CCC and making the jump up to UTMB. Maybe feels like somewhat complete with the CCC journey. So, qualifies for this rookie category. I'm excited to see what Shen throws down, and has been a very exciting racer. I've really enjoyed it, especially when he's not Strava dark too. Then one of the most fun people to follow on Strava, from a training standpoint. And yeah, he's been really consistent in terms of just racing the last few years.
2 more here before we get to podium winner picks. Most improved or comeback runner. So at least they've run UTMB before. I'm going to take the most improved angle here, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to even like single place movements. I'm going Arthur Joyo Bouillon. I think he's been 9th here before and maybe 7th. But he actually backtracked but improved his time a little bit. So I have him finishing somewhere in the middle of the top 10 in that like 5th to 6th range. And I think, anytime you move up even a spot in the top 10 at UTMB on either side, it's huge. So for that reason, he's my most improved at UTMB.
And he did the back-to-back 50, 30, 30 training runs with Ludo. circumnavigating all of Mont Blanc. So, I mean, if Ludo...
That was my favorite find in the research. Yeah.
That is a
Brett,
good one.
Who you got?
Well, I mean, I kind of had it like doubled up with our boy Timo Tollefson for most improved, because, you know, he had DNFs in 19, 21, 22, and then a 61st last year. So to be way up there, you know, into the top 20 this year, that's some solid improvement. The other person who I think we are going to see as a huge improvement, just because they DNF'd last year, is Ben Demon.
Yeah.
I know Finney's one of your favorites from a writing standpoint. And, you know, I enjoy the angle at which he takes the training for this race, the way he sees this sport, and then writes about it. I don't know. It's kind of fresh. It's cool. I like it. And I don't think his performance last year was indicative of, you know, the performance that he can put down. So I bet we see a huge amount of learnings from last year. And, you know, he's had some solid races. I think he's performed better this year leading up to UTMB than last year. You know, there were, I think, podium finishes on all of his races last year leading up to UTMB, but I think this year's were a little bit bigger stages, which helps a lot when you go into UTMB, because, you know, that's one of the things is like, it's weird to be running in a pack of 50 people who all have like 8-pound backpacks on. Normally you're by yourself if you're wearing that sort of gear. And it's just strange. It's foreign. So I think this level of competition is going to be less foreign to him this year. And that's going to, you know, ease the pressure a little bit and give that opportunity to showcase that sort of fitness.
Yeah, I agree. And I think something we saw with him this year is like, I love how transparent he is about his training. It does seem like he is indeed putting all of his eggs in the UTMB basket this year and really building with his races with the specificity and recognizing the little pieces that he needs to work on. So, like, for example, he's one of the few athletes I saw throwing down track workouts in his training of all the people that were sharing stuff on Strava. And then I had a little quote that I liked describing his training from his blog, that he's been breaking his training weeks into like 2 or 3 day little bits where he like either goes for distance or vert. So maybe he's targeting like, you know, 15,000 feet in 2 days. So doing that over like a 2-day period, and then doing these, like, he's been calling them like endurance micro blocks. And then has like easy runs for recovery. But then anytime he feels fresh, he's pushing the pace on the flats or hills. So just like recognizing all those little pieces that make UTMB, like the flats, the hills, like working them when you feel good, not just settling into that like sloggy rhythm. He did have another one of my like little favorite training days that I saw, which was 18 miles with 18,000 feet of climbing. And that was facilitated by, I think, a gondola where he did 5 repeats of like a probably 3,000 foot hill. So that's pretty cool.
Oh man, the quintuple VK.
Yeah, it sounds
amazing.
painful.
Last category before our picks, our book it picks. So this is like your most confident predictions somewhere inside the top 10. Again, I broke my own rules, and my book it is there are going to be 7 American men in the top 30, which I am very proud of. I'm very proud if we can put really 7 American men in the top 30.
Sentence.
Well, I was just thinking about like realistic. I think there's 7 American men that are going to run sub 24, but I think it's going to be so competitive that the top 30 is going to be under the 24-hour mark. And a couple, we named Mike McMonagle, Tim Tollefson. We talked about Canyon, Jim Walmsley, Jeff Mogavero. A couple of those, Cody Lind. Cody Lind, when he races, is a pretty consistent. I mean, he hasn't run to his potential yet at UTMB, but I believe in him. And another local Salt Laker, Grant Barnett. Grant had a super impressive speed goat. Went 1-2 with Mike at Grindstone, the 100-mile race last fall. And yeah, I like the American contingent going over. I think to play the game inside the top 10, Jim Walmsley on the podium is probably my book it. I think this is a tactical, smart, mental year. And I don't think he's going to let the front of the race fall too far away from him. So, yeah. I wanted to give a shout out to just the depth of performance.
My book it. We will see 10 American men in the top 1,500. Guaranteed. Guaranteed.
I will not apologize for my patriotism.
We haven't really talked about, I know we're about to say our like certain pick. I would say Hannes Naumberger from Germany is like most years would be a certain pick for me. 3-time winner at Lavaredo, 8th place here last year, and then 6th a prior year. But I think he suffered an Achilles injury in early August that he's been nursing, but is back to normal training. Kind of a question mark for me. He's really solid and consistent when he is on, but yeah, he might just be more of a question mark for me. But I do think my more certain person, I think probably Arthur. I agree with you, Finn. He seems like him or Baptiste. Baptiste ran a great race last year. I think kind of more local to the region too, based on what Tyler Green has shared. He had such like a huge fan base out there, and I think that can go a long way at a race like UTMB, where you've got like hordes of people cheering for you at every aid station and just giving you energy out there. So I could see those guys being 2 of my 5 or 6 Frenchmen we find in the top 10.
This is one of those super like in the weeds things that happens at Singletrack. But whenever we put out the posts for these preview episodes and like, what should we talk about? Historically, there has been this random Dan Jones contingent that will just flood our, like same thing Sally McRae style, just like flood our DMs like Dan Jones. Lately, Miguel Arsenio. We had 27 people just like name drop him in our DMs. So apparently he's doing something like that we need to put respect on. But I just wanted to get his name out there just to say we got it out there in the universe. Miguel Arsenio.
We are cheering for you.
Good call.
Miguel.
Was it?
He ran Gran Canaria, I believe. Another person we should discuss now that I speak about Gran Canaria is Raul Octaviu Butaci from Romania. Little bit hit or miss, but he did win Gran Canaria this year. I think it was 18th at UTMB last year. Wouldn't be surprised if that was somebody that snuck into the top 10. I think we'd want to see more of a Gran Canaria performance out of him than a UTMB 2023. But yeah. I think we're seeing improvement each year with him. So maybe keep your eye on him as well.
All right. Final predictions, podium and winner. This was gut-wrenching for me. My winner is Tom Evans because I am betting on freshness, especially on the men's side. Freshness wins this race. Tom Evans for the win. I've got Aurelian in second. I bought a lot of stock in him. Bought a lot of GameStop stock in Aurelian. And then I've got Jim rounding out my podium. And that pains me because it leaves off many people, but especially Germain. I have Germain in fourth. I'm going to just note that I have Germain in fourth, and it's an extremely tight men's race. I see the entire top 5 going under 20 hours. I see the entire top 10 going under 21 hours. And I see that podium spread historically or lately, it's been like a 2-hour thing. I think we're going to see like an 80 to 90 minute top 10 spread this year. So it's really tight. Like we're talking like a few minutes between each place from my view.
Oh, that's good breakdown. That's a good breakdown.
A lot of numbers.
I've got Jim Walmsley with the win. Jim with the double first since Killian 2011 on the men's side. I think it's going to happen in a similar fashion as Western states, and I think it's going to be against Germain, and I think it's going to come down to like the final climb where we see Jim, running poles, like really long poles up the final ski slope, just primal screams. And it's going to all get caught on the live stream. And like, that's where the winning move is going to get made. Because I predicted the winning move for Hard Rock. Turns out it was in the first climb.
Yes, you did.
This year at UTMB on the men's side, the winning move isn't going to happen until the last climb of the race. And it's going to be Jim with it. I think it will be slower than last year, which is why I think it's going to come down to like quote unquote like a kick. Which then I've got Germain in second. Third place, I've got Dmitry Mitiev and Tom Evans tying.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
To screw over
That's good.
Drew Holman, who now gets fifth.
Hey, that's
my top 5. And I don't think that's very unrealistic.
I don't think it is either.
There's a lot of like, I feel like there should be more France in the top 5 there. Like, I feel like Ludo and Matthew Blanchard.
Don't
and like
worry, I've got 4 in my top 5,
Frenchmen.
so you're
yeah, good. I figured Leo would go more France heavy. But I was just trying to paint a very dramatic picture.
Well, that's a very realistic
absolutely
picture.
Chaotic, and which will make for great TV.
Amazing
drama. Okay, I got Germain winning, and I think the winning move is going to be made on the final descent when it's like all like slightly rooty and rocky, and like you think you're home free, but Germain just like floats so fast down that stuff. I think that would be so sick, and I would love to see it. So we got Germain winning, Jim in second, Aurélien in third. Yeah, so Jim's in this like 4 Frenchman sandwich here. Aurélien in third, Matthew Blanchard in fourth, and then Ludo doing Ludo Forever Young things in fifth. That's what we got.
They just have Jim in this stranglehold. You just have to say it's a really thin pancake.
I will never break my arm. He's like, maybe just really, really thin pancake. Yeah. I could just see like Jim just giving Germain like a little love tap, and Germain's being like, you spilled my macchiato. Oh man. Oh, I can't wait for the Ricky Bobby to come out this race.
I like that top 5, Leah. That's legit.
Yeah, thanks.
That's legit.
Also a very realistic top 5.
Kinda. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Like the amount of like permutations.
I think those are 5 people that will definitely be in the top 10 for what it's worth.
Yeah.
You could make like 3 or 4 different top 5s with all completely different people, and it like wouldn't be that ludicrous.
Yeah. Oh man, that was good.
That one just happened on accident.
I want to get miscellaneous overall final thoughts from both of you before we go, but thanks to everyone that has tuned in, watching on YouTube, listening on the podcast players. I know we went long. It always reminds me, probably in futures, we should just do like a entirely unique women's preview, men's preview, because this race is just so huge. Leah, Brett, thank you so much. Brett, starting with you, any final thought, excitement, whatever that you want to leave the good people with?
I think we're going to see less concern regarding time and more concern just regarding racing on both the men's and women's side. I think we're going to see more packs of people longer, and people then actively trying to break one another later on in the race, which is just going to lend to like more condensed fields, but also just like really exciting racing later on. And I also think that's going to lead to, I think we're still going to see a good amount of carnage at UTMB.
Always.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Leah?
I think there's a good couples race going on. We got Katie and Germain, Katerina and Dimitri, and then Ragnar de Botts and Per Aurel. So that's at least 3 couples that I'm aware of. So some good like partner, husband, wife little duos in there that I think could make for some fun battles. But oh wow, balloons! I do think that Katie and Germain will likely bring it home in the couples category, though.
Yeah, neither of us had them both winning.
That's true. I could see that happening despite putting Ruth in first place.
I'm laughing because I was trying to find a good Ricky Bobby quote on the internet and couldn't find the one I was looking for. So I'll just say that this is going to be an amazing race. I cannot wait. And thanks to both of you for being here. This is great.